whoever you are, however grueling and seemingly shaping your experiences of anxiety or depression or mood disorder or self-consciousness or lack of self-worth, however painful those experiences are, they are experiences. They are not who you are. We are not going to be free of anxiety in this life.
So that should not be the goal. Let's say that again.
We should not be free of anxiety because sometimes those impulses or instincts serve us very well.
I was allowed to go to the very precipice of death, of life and death, and look over the edge. And I was allowed to behold what was there and allowed to come back. Most people aren't.
When we talk about being aligned with ourself or being aligned with our soul or hearing our higher self, that's really what we're talking about, is being connected to that divine part of ourself, that light-filled part of us that is connected to God energy, that is connected to everybody here and every experience we've ever had.
If more doctors, more professionals can open up to use intuitive gifts in their work, that's really important.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, mediumship, near-death experiences, consciousness, and what it all means. Welcome, Dr. Stephanie Dowrick, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Oh, it's so lovely to be with you, Amy. It's delightful. Thank you.
So let's start with your book, Your Name is Not Anxious, and how you came to kind of understand anxiety. Like, what is the lens through which you see anxiety in life?
Okay, let me talk about the title first. Because unlike quite a lot of writers in this space, I'm actually a literary writer. And before I was a writer, I was a publisher. I worked in London for many years, and I founded a feminist publishing house called the Women's Press, where we published many great American writers too, including Alice Walker. We published The Color Purple. Yeah, so I have I have a literary storytelling background. And one of the things that I have discovered over the many years of training in psychotherapy, not so much to be a therapist, but more to be, to give something more to my books, I've always utilized my storytelling abilities and fascination because I've been a reader since I was a little girl. You know, that's my big passion too. And shortly before writing this book, although this was not the reason for writing it, I discovered that storytelling is the default position of the brain. Now, that's no surprise to you or to any of your listeners. We're telling ourselves stories all the time.
Yep.
And how we tell ourselves stories, what we pay attention to, of course, shapes us very much. But there are also other factors shaping us. The world outside affects us. Psychobiology deeply affects us. Our genetics affect us. Our enculturation affects us, and so on and so on. But out of all of those things, we weave what we call an identity. And what I wanted to challenge with the title of this book is that when we feel overwhelmed with anxiety, or when anxiety dominates our lives, or we're kind of swimming in a soup of anxiety so that it manifests in different ways at different times, but it's a fairly constant presence, we can come to identify strongly with being anxious. Even if we compensate for it by being, for example, over-perfectionist or over-competitive or over-assertive. And so what I really wanted to say here was, with the title, Your Name is Not Anxious, first of all, I wanted to catch people a little bit with something that was different. But also I wanted to say that whoever you are and however grueling and seemingly shaping your experiences of anxiety or depression or mood disorder or self-consciousness or lack of self-worth, however painful those experiences are, they are experiences. They are not who you are. And they are not what your name is. And they are not what your name deserves to be either.
Mm-hmm.
You are always much, much more than that. And that final insight really came from something in the late 70s, early 80s, when I was still really young and a publisher. I trained in a psychotherapy called Psychosynthesis, which brought together spirituality and psychological insights. And it had been founded by a most fascinating man, and some of your listeners will know of him. His name was Roberto Assagioli, and it was the first transpersonal psychology to be given to humankind. And he was an Italian Jew who had to survive in Rome during the horrendous period of the Second World War. He would look up at the sky at night where he could see the stars because, of course, the buildings were not lit, even though it was a big city. The buildings were not lit. He would look up at the sky, and instead of feeling, I am an insignificant little something down here in fear of my life, and he was in fear of his life, and he was in fear of all good people's lives and all people's lives. He was in great fear, but he would look up at the stars and he would know himself to be a part of something wondrous. And that's a fantastic story also, because no matter how diminished we feel, and this is, I think, your story that you tell, we are part of something wondrous.
Can you say more about your experience integrating psychology and spirituality, the psychosynthesis? Because I think you're right. Like probably most people now know it as like transpersonal psychology.
Yes, that's right. Well, to me, it's completely natural. I can't actually see either of those. It's like a two-legged stool without one leg. I mean, and then I think there needs to be a third leg on the stool, which is action, behavior. How do we translate our insights into action and behavior? But if we take spiritual as meaning the health of our spirit, the health of our engagement with life, the health of our life force, then we begin to understand that psychology can sometimes help us with that, but psychology on its own is not enough.
I couldn't agree more. I love that.
Is certainly not enough because it attends so much to the material, but not so much to the being and becoming.
Well, and I think sometimes it minimizes to like the inner world of the person versus the deeper connection with the outer world as well.
That's right. And it also minimizes the way that we see the other. So from a spiritual perspective, we can at least have a little play with the idea that Teilhard de Chardin had, that each and every wisdom teacher has had, that we are spiritual beings in a human body. So if we actually at least play with this idea or begin to take it seriously, then the idea of the other is transformed. I can't then look at you and say, you're a species within a species that I can't love. Because no, you are also a soul or a spirit in a human body. And this is transformative, not only of our psychological well-being, but it's transformative of our social and community well-being, because we begin to see ourselves in the other, which is, of course, the golden rule. And I've written a lot about that, more in other books than in this one. But it does make a difference in how we think about our own anxiety and how we think about our inner qualities that we can bring forward to support ourselves, that they are our spiritual inheritance. We are not fundamentally bad, weak, sinful. We are not.
Mm-hmm.
We are fundamentally people here to learn how to be engaged, appreciative, loving, dynamic, quiet, noisy.
Mm-hmm. All the things that
receptive.
make this spiritual experience a human one.
That make this. I love that. Yeah. Thanks, Amy. Yes, that's beautiful.
And I like this notion of spirituality because I always like hearing other people's kind of definitions of what it means to be spiritual, but the health of the spirit and the engagement with life.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that's it. That's crystallized for me, is like, how engaged are you with life? And how do you see kind of these mental health issues, anxiety, as potentially a way to like disengage from life often, or also maybe as a spiritual, like I think of oftentimes like the symptoms or the disorders, the diagnoses, because that's how therapists communicate, right? This person has anxiety, this person has depression, which to me means nothing. It's just like, here's a list of criteria and you can check the boxes. It tells me nothing about the person. But how do you see them perhaps as a spiritual call versus a psychological disorder?
Yeah. Okay. Well, slightly moving away from that. We are not going to be free of anxiety in this life. We are not going to be free of anxiety.
So that should not be the goal. Let's say
be
that
the goal.
again.
We should not be free of anxiety because sometimes those impulses or instincts serve us very well. And I talk quite a lot about instinct. We need to trust our instincts for self-protection and protection of others. We need to trust and develop that much more acutely rather than overlaying it with all sorts of other people's opinions. Let's learn to listen to those instincts that keep us safe, but also keep other people safe. And in that, there will be some anxiety. That's I think, healthy and part of our repertoire of being alive. The difficulties come when anxiety is kind of your base state, when almost everything makes you anxious, or when you're continually and continuously judging yourself against standards or judgments that diminish your capacity. So where the spirituality comes in is that understanding what resources you have. For example, self-forgiveness. You know, you are going to make mistakes. Do you have to beat yourself up every time? Do you have to obsess about everything that went wrong without noticing for a single moment that actually something went rather well? Or do you have to bring to mind your criticisms of yourself and other people rather than your connecting capacity to be an encouraging person in this lifetime? I've written also about forgiveness and kindness in other books, but one of the things that I really notice is that if we begin to make it a practice to encourage other people, even if it feels a little bit false or we're unused to it or the words are a bit awkward in our mouths, it becomes more natural to encourage ourselves rather than to discourage ourselves. So anxiety is itself both discouraging and disempowering. And what I really wanted to do with this book, Your Name is Not Anxious, was to re-encourage and re-empower. And I do that, of course, within the spiritual context that we've been talking about, and there's a story at the end of the book about taming the dragon with kindness rather than being St. George and slaying it. The dragon being whatever frightens us most particularly. But I also wanted very much to draw on the most recent research that we have, which tells us so much about our body, this sacred body that we're living in, and how anxiety affects the body and how our body affects the mind. So that holy trinity of the mind, body, spirit that we talk so much about, I really wanted to come to grips with it here. And for the first time ever in my many books, I talk about calming the body first. But how are we calming the body? We're doing it with the mind. And if we're doing it within that larger context of at least some glimpse of a spiritual understanding that this is our natural resource, it becomes much more possible to, for example, identify when the parasympathetic nervous system is agitated and how to soothe it.
So I want to go back to, there's a lot I want to go back to here. I'm like vigorously taking notes on the side. You talk about instincts. Do you differentiate instinct from intuition?
I don't know that we need to worry too much about that difference. I mean, some of us are more intuitive than others. All of us have instincts. Instincts is a capacity of our species, as it's a capacity of all the species with which we share our planet. Intuition is a capacity of consciousness, so it's unique to our species. So we can certainly cultivate intuition in a quite different way from our most astonishing fellow species, where their instinct may be incredibly strong. And if we think about household pets, for example, who are highly domesticated, who wouldn't survive for 5 minutes in the wild, but who know perfectly well when someone comes into the house who's a friend and who's indifferent, or who needs to have a little pat, or who doesn't. They know that. That's instinct. But our intuitions go along, I think, in the human body and mind, along with discernment, so that we can learn from our own experiences. And this is why a diversity of experience is so rich and so needed, because we can learn from all of our experiences, and particularly those that go wildly off kilter, where we fall absolutely flat on our face. But we can learn to be discerning as to where to put our energy and to where to put our intuition, that this is the moment or the path or the direction. There's also the whole issue of, are we guided? How are we guided? So I have had the experience over many, many years of writing about subjects that are far greater than my ordinary mind could encompass. So, forgiveness, kindness, I've already mentioned, tolerance, generosity, so on and so on, these huge fundamental qualities. How did I dare do it? Well, I just had the intuition that somehow I would be supported, which did not make that work easy.
But that's how you're sort of differentiating. It sounds like how you might be differentiating a little bit here is like instinct is kind of that more primitive, am I safe? Do I need to protect myself? That often gets, that anxiety really runs with. Right. Oftentimes a little too much in this world. Versus intuition is this trusting that you know what you need to know when you need to know it.
Yes. Or that something will come. I've often stood in front of my library and just let my hands find a book. I can often remember where a quote I need or a reference I need is on the page, but I might not know where the book is. Or I might let myself ask a question internally and just trust that somewhere, somehow, I will not necessarily gain an answer. That's too primitive, but that I will gain an insight somehow when I've planted the question and watered it with my trust as well as my attention.
Mm-hmm.
So, but when people
Planted
are highly
a question
anxious,
and watered it with my trust.
But when people are highly anxious, Amy, they lose their trust. They lose their trust in themselves. They lose their trust in environment, in their social environment, and they lose their trust in others. And we are living in a time in which trust has been robbed from so many people because of social and political circumstances. So those of us who understand that trust is our spiritual inheritance, I'm not talking about belief, I'm talking about trust. Trust that our life is of value. Trust that your life is of value. Trust that we belong in this physical environment and we need to protect it because we are utterly dependent upon it. But we are working with and on those ideas within a context in which they are profoundly trivialized by the larger culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how do you differentiate between belief and trust? It's been a while since I've talked to you about what I'm up to. I want to first start by thanking so many of my supporters who have supported me on Patreon and in my Circle community. What's so exciting now is we have my new Circle community up and running, where if you want to contribute to supporting the podcast, you can do so at different levels for different values. So head on over to my Circle group. You can actually find the link in the show notes below. And there's opportunities to continue to support the podcast. And I have to say, your support of the podcast is frankly what has kept this podcast going over time. I have been funding the podcast solely by myself. I get a little bit of money in advertising dollars, but not a lot. So anything that you can give, if you have found value in this podcast, and it's not just giving without anything back, I will give back to you. You will be a part of this community with opportunities for discounts and conversations and ask Amy anythings. But it's a great opportunity for you to support what hopefully has helped you over the many, many years. Also, there's so many other ways now that you can work with me. I am offering a group course called Live Your Life Backwards, which is finishing its first cohort this winter and has been absolutely incredible. There's retreats coming up. There's workshops. There's one-on-one sessions with me. So many options that we can work together. So make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed to my podcast, and make sure you're subscribed to my newsletter, where you will get a free soul wisdom workbook to help you dig deeper into the virtues that you want to be living in this lifetime. We all need so much more spirituality now. We are in a spiritual crisis, and I am giving you so many tools to tap into your own spirituality. So check out and don't forget to subscribe to Life, Death, and the Space Between so you never miss an episode.
Well, belief is often something that you're taught or that's required of you. Ideally, it's something that you come to through your own exploring. But even then, the human mind wants to cling to things. And the Buddhists are so good about not clinging, because each of us is an evolving being. So belief can keep us a little bit stuck at the station we were at, rather than the process we are on right now. So all institutional religion is very big on belief. And some of those beliefs are common to them all, and some of those beliefs are highly supremacist and divisive. So I'm cautious with the idea of belief. How do you feel about the idea of belief?
I mean, I think I hear what you're saying in terms of usually belief. Like when I think of belief, I think of, I don't love this word, but it's what's coming to mind. So I'm just going to go with it. Like more of like an indoctrination, like it comes from external versus internal.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah.
And like I'm thinking about it even as we talk about spirituality and like my belief system around spirituality actually is more trust because I've always said it's my belief system, but now as I'm kind of talking this out, my belief system came through my own personal experiences, which I then learned to trust more and trust more and trust more versus someone externally telling me like this is true or this is not true.
That's right. I like that very much. So you are emphasizing trust in one's own experiences and also that we can grow beyond each experience. Like we don't have to be stuck, which is why we can really embrace the wholeness of our evolving experiences. But I think your idea of your trust system is fabulous. I like that.
But what
for
would
me,
you
it's
say?
got a dynamism.
What would you say to someone who's anxious, who says, but I trust that my anxiety is going to keep me safe? It has so far, that this has served this purpose for me.
Yeah. Okay. I would say, can you just please experiment with whether letting go of some of that anxiety and feeling a little bit more alive could feel even safer. So where is anxiety somewhat limiting your choices? Where could those choices be somewhat expanded? Where could your feeling of freedom grow? And could that trust keep you safer?
And so I guess I want to understand more about this whole body anxiety. But I think I also love where you started, which is around the stories that we tell ourselves. This is something that I teach in my course that I'm running right now, is having people attend to what are the stories you're telling yourself? Because I think so often, like you said, our brain tells us so many stories.
Yes.
And how do you see, I think, many mental health issues as the stories you're telling yourself about X, Y, and Z?
Yes. Okay. Well, there's sort of two distinct areas here, as you know very well. So if somebody has clinical depression or has really severe life-threatening anxiety, then there has to be much more than a change of storytelling. I feel very, very strongly that it's entirely appropriate for people who have got a really life-threatening or acute depression or anxiety also to be medicated, to be protected, and to work through those sort of traumatic stages until they come to a more even place where there can be a little bit of detachment. And that's the key here, because when you are completely lost in, well, it could be, for example, really severe OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And I write in my book, I allow a parent to tell a story of her teenage son who in the United States who suffered from appalling OCD. And in fact, there are rather few inpatient places, and they had to have intense family therapy, and he had intense therapy, and they had medication and so on and got through it. But many people don't get through it easily. Mm-hmm. And there are other forms of anxiety too that, completely colonize your life. Where it's a bit different, where it's, our more everyday anxiety that can be very limiting, and certainly changes your perception of yourself. One of the absolutely key things is learning a little bit of detachment. And that's where the identity question comes in. When you can laugh at the idea, your name is not anxious, when you can disidentify a little bit from the fact that you have anxiety, I am not my anxiety. I have thoughts, I am not my thoughts. I have intense, painful feelings, I am more than my feelings. When you can begin this process a little bit of disidentification, then gradually you might cease reinforcing your anxiety every time something goes wrong. You might take a step back so that the things that cause you anxiety are not continually center stage. When you begin to see the slightly bigger picture, that actually some things have gone at least reasonably well. Not everybody thinks you're a complete fool. Mm-hmm. Not everybody has a glorious life, while you are the only one who suffers. And at that point, we can begin also to look at the stories we tell ourselves, which is very different from cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm not just talking about individual thoughts. I'm talking about the meta story. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? How do I see you, the other? How do I see my gift to the world? Mm-hmm. How do I see, and so on and so on. So we begin to get much more into that psychospiritual zone, which is where we can be resourced. We can be resourced through beauty. We can be resourced through awe. We can be resourced through kindness, our own to others, mm-hmm. others to us, mm-hmm. and so on and so on. And I do want to add, because there can be so much kind of puritanical moralism here too. If in this space also you, the listener, are someone who needs medication or benefits from medication, go for it. Andrew Solomon, who has written so much on this, marvelous writer, Andrew Solomon, has said people often say to him, why are you still taking medication when you seem so well? And he says, I seem so well because I'm still taking my medication. So we don't want to get into moralism here. We want to expand our horizons, not contract them.
Mm-hmm. And so what is your thought on this? You talk about this in the book, this notion of the importance of finding that spiritual self, finding that meaning within the context of whatever mental health issue you're struggling with.
Yes. There's not a recipe. There's not a recipe for this. There's more of an invitation. Just to, again, I'm going to use the word play because I don't want to use the word work. Just to play with the notion that the qualities that are common to our human lives also live in me. Just to experiment with the notion that those great humane qualities, every faith, every philosophy, every instinctual, and I'm using that word instinctual now, tendency that we have, for example, to save another person. If we saw a child drowning, would we stand on the bank and worry about our good clothes and our briefcase? No. I think most of us would have an instinct to jump in and forget our good clothes and our briefcase. So most of us have an instinct for being with others, connecting with others, helping others, and being available to be helped that has somehow or another been either stultified or to some extent wounded or broken, and that we can do something about that wounding and breaking. And that is spiritual work.
Mm-hmm.
I have used the word work. That is what spirituality is, reclaiming the wholeness of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, Stephanie, that is a beautiful place to stop. That is what spirituality is, reclaiming the wholeness of ourselves.
Yes.
If people are interested in your work, where to find you, your books, can you tell us where they can do that?
Yes. Well, I'm hoping that it's in lots of bookshops in its St. Martin's Press publication. But they can also, of course, find me on my website, stephaniedowrick.com. They can find me on my public Facebook page, Stephanie Dowrick, public page. And I would love them to be in touch. And on my website, they can put their name in to be on a mailing list and to hear more from me. Because I think having had this conversation with you, which has been very focused on anxiety, it might be also that some of them would like to read Seeking the Sacred, which is also available in the United States. But if my book helps even one person in your life, and I'm speaking now to the listeners, whether it's you or someone you love, I will be so grateful. I wrote this book because there was someone in my life who was suffering inordinately, hugely, who had access to the best help that she could get, and it was good help, but it wasn't enough. She needed more insight, more self-understanding, and more encouragement towards self-worth and self-love.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, in many ways, it feels like there's been a split from the psychosynthesis that you talked about earlier, that psychology and spirituality have become very separate. And we've lost, I think, a big part of healing when we do that, because I think so much of this process is a spiritual process. And, you know, we talk about spiritual awakenings, but like you could have a profound spiritual awakening through the process of therapy and knowing yourself and engaging more with life, because that I believe is what it is all about. How engaged are you with life?
Yes, 100%. What a joy it's been to talk with you, Amy.
Likewise. I'm glad we sorted out all the tech stuff.
Yes,
we did. We had some technological issues at the beginning. So, well, Stephanie, thank you so very much for your time. What time is it there? Where are you?
It's 9:15
on Saturday.
Yep, Saturday.
Okay. And it's Friday here. So how is tomorrow?
How is tomorrow?
Yeah.
I think tomorrow could be radiant.
Oh, good. Okay, good. I always think it's so interesting. Like, are you, this is the question of time, right? Like, are you in the future?
Yes, I think we are. I think we are. And there are lots of, we could have another conversation on another day, or I could introduce you to someone else, because Australia is the continent with the longest surviving culture in the world. The Indigenous First Nations people of Australia have the longest surviving culture in the world, 60,000 years. So yes, we are the past and we are the future.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for your time, for getting up early with me on a Saturday morning, for ending my week with you. It's been wonderful. So thank you.
It's been great for me too. Thank you so much.
Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.